So here's a video that's a little different from what I normally do, but a very long time ago, I did a mini timeline on the Waxworks movies. It was actually my very first mini timeline, and I created the concept of doing mini timelines on 2-episode franchises specifically to talk about them because I love them. And anyway, recently one of my long-term watchers commented about not figuring out what all 18 monsters were and that somebody should do a video about it. So this is that video. But not only are we going to identify the 18 monsters, but their victims and their fates as well. Monster number 1. One of the more prominent ones of the film is the werewolf. It's the first vignette that we see, and it establishes the rules of what's happening. It's a big 2-legged version similar to the Howling style werewolves, and we see it kill Dana Ashbrook in the film, who then becomes a werewolf himself and turns into part of the Waxwork. Later in the film, when all the creatures are brought to life along with their victims, they're both there, and the werewolf plays a major part, killing Sir Wilfrid. So in the battle, we see Wolf Tony being stabbed and killed, but we don't witness the fate of the Rhys Davies one, but it's assumed that it died in the fire. Monster 2. Our second monster is also really prevalent in the film, and it kind of becomes one of the main antagonists, and it's Count Dracula, here portrayed by Ator himself. He's a pretty classic version of the character, lives in the cliché castle, and has several vampiric minions. His victim, who we see him claim in the film, is our main character's ex-girlfriend China, played by the person I actually blame because Rio is innocent. At the end battle, we actually see both of them meet their demise. China is taken out first, as Mark's butler stakes her, and then Dracula himself turns into a bat, but is grabbed in midair and shot point blank.
Make my day.
Monster 3. Our third monster to get a heavy focus is this mummy, continuing the film's focus on analogs of classic Universal monsters. We've had a Wolfman so far, a Dracula, and now a mummy. This is probably one of the more menacing mummies in horror, as he's big and imposing and crushes heads like a champ. Outside of his wrapped up bandage look, he's also got the rotted face look happening, and his victim is actually seen being claimed in the film, and it's grizzled policeman Inspector Roberts, who strolls into the display because he's fascinated with Egyptian history. Now, in the finale, we do see the mummy's death as we get a brief glimpse of it engulfed in flames, so it perished in the fire. We also view Roberts, who actually never left the crypt and hence didn't join the final fray, and burned along with everything else. Monster 4. Our next very clear villain is the first that isn't based on a universal archetype and instead is an actual historical figure, and it's the Marquis de Sade. This version is a very sadistic character, more interested in the dealing of pain than the receiving of pleasure, and differs very greatly from his real-life inspiration by actually being a murderous villain instead of his true-life inspiration, who, by all accounts, was just more of an overall jerky creep than anything else. He nearly allures Sarah here, although she's saved by Mark, denying him the victim. However, shortly after, he is able to claim their friend Gemma, who joins the Waxwork. Shortly after, upon release, the Marquis becomes one of the main villains of the film, killing off several villagers. His victim Gemma is seen killed by Mark as he shoots her, and then there's a final showdown between the Marquis and Mark. De Sade is taken out by Sarah, who chops him in the back with an axe, showing herself to be free of his influence. Monster 5. The fifth villain is an odd one because it's the zombie. In the Waxwork itself, there's only a single zombie poised over its victim, but in the actual world within it, there's an entire horde of Romero-style black and white zombies. The one from the display is present here, but is just a member of the pack and appears to be wearing glasses. It's actually said that the glasses are an actual prop from something called Nutty Zombies from Hell, which is what lures in the piece's victim, James. Now, it's while in this world that Mark discovers that their ability to harm you depends upon your belief in it, so you actually think that the creatures can't harm you, then they can't. He realizes that this same technique will allow him to escape the waxwork, and in the end fight, the zombie display is unusual because not only does the zombie and victim James come to life, but the zombie hand is also set free as an added antagonist. In the final fight, both are dispatched as we see James's head caved in by the butt of a rifle, and the main zombie is taken out by Mark, who stabs it through the chest with a sword, showing that I guess these zombies don't require headshots to be taken out. The hand actually manages to escape and would end up being a major part of the sequel, and is even kind of weird that it's there to begin with, because it doesn't appear to be a part of the waxwork and only appeared in Mark's fantasy world where he put it up on the gate. Monster number 6. Okay, so the rest of the monsters don't get individual vignettes, but are still pretty visible throughout. And there is one that, although we don't get to see what happens in their other world, we do get to see them claim their victim, and it's this Phantom of the Opera, which takes the life of their school friend David, and he becomes a part of the waxwork.
They made a movie about the Phantom of the Opera?
Several.
Here's a quick and minor note. This dialogue also occurs in the comic book adaptation of the movie, which I used to have in 3D form, and I wish I knew where that thing went. And this bit of disbelief that the character had about a movie made about them featured Jason Voorhees himself. Apparently, Jason didn't appear in the script though, and it's not known whether there was ever an actual intention to put the hockey mask killer in the movie, or if it was simply artistic license in this comic book. Anyway, in the finale, we do see them both get their just rewards, as we see Sarah take an axe to the head of David and see the Phantom burning. Monster 7. Monster number 7 is one of the very first ones that we see when our main crew enters the waxworks. He's an axe murderer in a wooded area, apparently a sort of lumberjack killer. I believe he's intended to be a take on the 80s slasher characters, given the surroundings, and it's possible that this could be where they would have thought to have a Jason-like character. His victim is this bespectacled guy in a Letterman's jacket that's already a part of the display before they arrive, so he is someone that was pushed in there at an earlier time. During the ending, the lumberjack guy is actually the very first of the monsters to get taken out, and he's killed by an arrow through the back as the cavalry arrives. You sort of see him again in this shot of chaos, but I assume that's just continuity and having the actor there to create extra insanity behind them, but it's also possible the arrow didn't kill him and he instead burns up in the fire later. The Letterman can be seen rising and is amid the horde before the battle commences, but then is not seen again. Although we don't see him killed, we can probably assume that he was taken out off camera or simply perished in the fire. Monster 8. The other display right at the entrance is a take on the Frankenstein monster. Since we had a Drac, a wolf, and a mummy, and even a phantom, it seems appropriate to have a Frank. He's in a pretty standard looking laboratory setting, and his general appearance is recognizable enough that you know who he is, but also distinct enough to avoid any lawsuits that Universal might be considering. He has a stitched up face and those squared off shoulders, and his victim is this very curly haired woman in a long white dress. They both appear in the final battle, and I think the victim has an axe in her head right here, although she's still fighting. She's not really seen again, although this looks like her body on the ground right after Sarah kills David, so I take it that the axe did kill her. But a little later on, as this guy's dumping gas on the Phantom, it looks like she may still be fighting back here behind them. But that's likely just a continuity error. Although maybe she wasn't killed back there, but ended up dead later on anyway. The Frankenstein is very visible throughout the fight though, because he's huge, and we do see him burning up near the end. Monster number 9. Monster 9 is also seen pretty early on, and it's this witch doctor or voodoo priest guy here. He's I guess, sacrificing a chicken, and his victim is very briefly seen in this early bit, but it's a blonde woman with a long white dress. She's different from the previous women in a long white dress, and that she's blonde and has her hair pulled back into a ponytail. Again, she's already a victim, so she's been converted prior to the events of the film, and I guess has the chicken head stuffed in her mouth. The monster himself does get a pretty prominent on-screen death as he and Mark scuffle, and the witch doc gets a sword plunged through his chest. During the ending, the victim is first spotted in her actual display, struggling with one of the townsfolk, flipping him over and then strangling him. She's seen again as Tony is stabbed, and she's in the background being strangled, but then is spotted extremely briefly passing in front of Desaad, but isn't seen again, so she likely burned. Monster 10. Okay, halfway there, and guy number 10 is this thing, which sort of appears like it could be another Frankenstein analog, but based on the star in his chest, it's more likely that this is a golem from Jewish folklore. It does appear to be made of clay like a golem and has moss on the side growing out of it. Its victim gets a little further hint since it's a man dead at the bottom of the stair and he has a page boy haircut. And this styling matches the most famous look of the golem from the 1920 film version and would seem to be a little inside shout out to that. When the works come to life, the golem is seen several times, including crushing a guy's head, and later is seen being kicked over by Mark, but then is not seen again, so again, fire. Pageboy only shows up in the background and oddly is in front of Wilfred in this shot, but then also right behind him here, so whoops. That's the last we see of him though, so just another for the blaze. Monster 11. Next up is this guy here who looks like some sort of snake-man hybrid, although I suppose it could be reason that this was their attempt at some sort of creature from the Black Lagoon approximation, but is a bit more like the thing from or possibly the bad dude from Dreamscape. He's been made a sideshow attraction and is in a cage, and his victim is what appears to be a carnival barker or something. He's wearing a very distinctive jacket and hat and has a pencil mustache, and later we see Snake Man come to life, but we don't see him in the fight, so it's likely that he's stuck in the cage. Pencil Stash is in the crowd when the fight kicks in, but seems to lose his hat in the fray, as this appears to be him right before Tony is killed, but that's one of the only times that we see him in the chaos. We don't get to see either one of them taken out, so it's presumed that they both burned, and probable that Snake Man never even got out of his little wagon there. Monster 12. Our next monster is another obvious tribute to the classic Universal characters with what resembles the Invisible Man. He's got the classic bandages cover his bod, and possibly based on the frame could maybe be an invisible woman? Later, when all the creatures come to life, we get a close-up of the creature's face, and it's drawn a mouth that could possibly be in the shape of black lipstick, but it could also just be simply a mouth drawing, so I'm not sure. Their victim is a woman, which I suppose is being murdered by being force-fed gasoline from a gas pump, which is, I mean, that's a little extreme, right? I don't remember that part of the Invisible Man. The victim is wearing 20 styles garb and this fashionable hat and string of pearls, and although you do see her for a couple of quick flashes in the final fight, she's not really around, and of course, except for the start of it all, you can't see the invisible monster, which shouldn't be a surprise. So either they're killed really early on, or took off their clothes and continued the fight fully transparent. Either way, they're both probably killed in the fire. Monster number 13. This next one is a weird one because it's very clearly a take on the Body Snatchers pods and pod people. The creature itself is pretty much that, a pod thing covered in moss and stuff, and the victim is this woman on the ground, half covered in the moss herself and with one of the pod's tendrils around her neck. And she's wearing 50s styles clothing, so here's why it's weird. In the end, when the displays come to life, a duplicate of the victim emerges from the pod, even more covered in the mossy stuff. Now, in the big showdown, it looks like one of them is clean of the moss now, looking like the regular version, and she's visible a few times in the brawl, like right before Jenkins is killed and strangling this guy near the ending of it as well. It's kind of hard to tell which is which though, so this could, I guess, be either one of them, but we never see them get killed, so there are two more for the fire. Also, the pod itself is shown to be active as Sarah uses it to dispatch Hans, and in echoing another horror icon, it says, "Feed me." right beforehand, showing that it too is alive. Since it can't really move on its own, it definitely burns. Monster 14. Monster number 14 is a more direct representation of the influence, since it's good old saucy Jack, looking pretty much just like you would think Jack the Ripper would look. Outside of the Marquis de Sade, he's the only other one to be based on an actual historical figure, unless I guess you count Dracula. He's under a gas lamp in what's marked as Dead End Alley and uses his trademark straight razor. We don't get a good shot of either him or his victim until they're all waking up, but he's also got some big old mutton chops and a fairly unconvincing mustache. And his victim is a Victorian-era looking prostitute in a frilly dress and a flower in her hair. In the fight, you can see the victim in the background here, and then Mark gets her with the sword here, killing her. Jack also gets an on-screen death as Sarah stabs him in the back in his own alley display. Monster 15. Getting near the end here, and the remainder of the villains are only quickly seen in the earlier bits and only get close-ups at the very end. Just before they all come to life, we see this one, and it looks like a reference to Jekyll and Hyde. We see a weird monster-faced man in a lab coat with a syringe, and his victim is a woman who also appears to be in Victorian garb, and this gigantic oversized hat with ribbons on the top. Hatwoman is pretty easily spotted in several scenes in the fighting later, but we're never shown her demise, and oddly, the Hyde guy is only seen once more. He's visible in the monster lineup before the fight, and then never again. So I suppose they both simply burn with the rest. Monster 16. Number 16 is seen in the background a few times, mostly out of focus, but gets a nice clear shot as the displays are all waking up, and it's this little demon baby that's obviously a riff on the It's Alive baby, and maybe the one from 12/12, as if I needed to get that visual in my head again. 12/12 might be the most scarring movie I've featured on this channel. Baby's wearing this cute little jumper and is on the shoulder of his victim, a nanny that looks like the woman who owns Tweety Bird. The baby monster is given a pretty glorious death as it's kicked across the room and shotgun blast into oblivion. We don't get the nanny's demise, although it appears as if she's fighting Jenkins in the background here, is strangled and slumps over, but she's shown again fighting later on, so I guess that didn't kill her. We don't see a death for her, so she's another fire victim. Monster 17. Next up is another one that is sort of seen in the background, but it's hard to tell what it is until the ending of the film, and it's this Mars Attacks looking alien. It's got 6 eyes, a vagina mouth, and an exposed brain, and I guess lives in some sort of ice world. His victim is wearing a sort of space colonist outfit and has a distinctive looking mustache and beard. The alien gets a pretty front and center death scene as it takes an axe to the exposed brain to kill it off, and his victim seen being taken out as Sarah chops him with the axe. Monster number 18. And then there was one. The final monster, Monster 18, is only seen a few times. It's this witch monster here, and we only get this one close-up shot here. We don't even get to see what her waxwork display looks like. And because of this, we don't really get a shot of her victim. She herself doesn't really come into play in the final fight. Like Hyde, she's in the group shot, but then disappears, never to be seen again, so she likely burns. As for which is her victim, it's a bit of a guessing game. During the fights, there's actually a few characters unaccounted for. First of all, there's this woman here, next to the Phantom, in a sleeveless dress. It's hard to make out her face, but she doesn't appear to be any of the others that have been featured, so it's possible that she's the victim. This is the only shot she's visible in, though. But then there's this guy, who I'm going to call Pirate Shirt. He's first seen attacking Wilfred and has a few random appearances in the brawl, and then is given an on-screen death as a villager shoots him near the ending of the battle. Considering he's more prominent and his garb would probably be appropriate for someone in an era of witches, I think he's the more likely candidate. But There's also White Shirt Guy, who is only seen in 2 fleeting shots. Once thrown across a table and once attacked by Mark. He seems to have blood on his back and something going on with his face, but he doesn't match any of the other victims. It's possible that he could be Inspector Roberts, but we're also shown that he doesn't leave the crypt, so I don't know. But yeah, one of these 3 are the witch's victim, and there's really no explanation for who the other 2 are. But besides the Waxworks themselves, there's a few other threats that our heroes face. And they're the staff of the museum that plotted out the whole thing. First up, there's the previously mentioned Hans, played by little person actor Michu. He assists throughout and is actually going at it pretty strong in the end, but finally gets his due reward from Sarah, who picks him up and drops him into the pod, which I suppose it eats him. There's also Junior, a really tall butler-looking character. Although he doesn't speak, he seems very childlike, accidentally killing someone before they could be put into a waxwork. But he's a pretty tough guy, and during the big fight, he's the one that kills Jenkins. Mark doesn't take too kindly to this, however, and stabs Junior with his sword. And oddly, this doesn't seem to really kill him, as he just kind of remains on the ground and watches as Mark takes his blade into action. I believe it's meant to imply that he's in the process of dying, though. It didn't last much longer. Either way, the fire most likely finished him off. And that leaves just one, David Warner himself, the Waxwork Man. And he's fantastic in this, but that kind of goes without saying. He's the one that's organized the entire thing and is planning to see the world destroyed through the unleashing of the displays. His name, or possibly alias, is David Lincoln, and he's apparently not quite human since it's stated that he doesn't age. It's revealed that he killed Mark's grandfather and stole 36 artifacts, and this is something that I think often goes overlooked in the movie. It's not the Waxworks themselves that are cursed, but the objects. There's one for each monster and one for each victim. We see them all very, very quickly, and it's probably impossible to match them up, but let's see. I believe that the top items belong to the monsters, and the bottom row belongs to their victims. And if that's true, we have Hyde's needle, a rag, an ear which may be Frankenstein's, the Golem's star, Jack's razor, this dagger, something I can't see, and the Invisible Man's glasses and nose. Then, 2 things I can't place, but I think this round thing is what the pod person is holding in her hands in the end. Next, some sort of medallion, the It's Alive Baby's binky. There's an Ankh here for the mummy, a medallion that belongs to Dracula. A watch which I believe to be the watch that the zombie hand is wearing. A pentagram necklace seen around the werewolf. Something I can't see. And a dagger. Although it's not in the case, it's said later on that the Phantom's mask is authentic, so I guess it's another one of them. But that's all I got. If you know what the others are or have theories, let me know. Anyway, Lincoln is eventually killed in the end and falls into the wax, ending his reign of terror. So there you have it, 18 monsters, 18 victims, some other villains, and 36 artifacts, all identified. Well, I guess I didn't identify all the artifacts, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, if you think that you can probably peg down any of the others, or if you spotted some other things going on in the background maybe that I missed, let me know that down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video sort of outside of the normal thing, tell me that down there too. And of course, hit the like button if you enjoyed it. That would certainly be appreciated. Also, if you enjoy what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment, because you might have a video made about that comment, much like this one. There you go. Yeah, and check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, and maybe become a patron like one of these guys over here. Certainly appreciate that. And otherwise, I will see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks, guys, and bye-bye.